Welcome to Doc 9 Tech Talks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Vicky Birkby, who is Director of Customer Strategy and Change at Belmont Green, who are the company behind Vida Homeloans. So today we're going to discuss some of the key technology trends driving change within the mortgage sector, their vision of the optimal future mortgage journey, and how new technology has underpinned Vida's recent re-entry into the market. So firstly, thanks for joining us, Vicky. Do you want to start by giving us a quick overview about yourself and your role at Belmont Green?
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much for having me. So I guess, in terms of my background, I actually trained as an architect originally. So architect of buildings rather than computer systems. And I actually always found the business side of that a little bit, and the creative side of the business more interesting than perhaps buildings, which probably serves the greater public quite well. So I actually did a bit of architecture post leaving university and then went to Accenture. I was there for quite a long time, started as an analyst and kind of went up through the ranks, I guess. And certainly for me, that was quite a good grounding across the end-to-end change world, strategy world, across lots of different industries. And in my last couple of years there, I worked quite a lot with some of the leaders of the sort of larger mortgage lenders across the UK, and also the then Council of Mortgage Lenders, now UK Finance, really around what the future of the mortgage industry would look like, and in particular how technology and I guess the future view of kind of the future workforce would really impact the mortgage industry.
Yes.
I then left Accenture in 2018 and moved to a slightly smaller consultancy firm called the Barclay Partnership, which was awesome. It just gave me some slightly more broad experience around some different industries and different types of work. And I actually landed with them at Vida or Belmont Green in early 2019 to a large-scale transformation program. And 7 months later, I decided to take the leap out of management consultancy and into industry. So been with Vida now for just over a year officially, but coming up to 2 years unofficially. And yeah, it's been great. So yeah, as you said, Mark, I'm the Director of Customer Strategy and Change. I guess my role within the business really is to support straight through from a CEO perspective in terms of what does the future direction of the industry, but also of us as a business look like? How can we then manifest that back into the operation and the products and the proposition that we have across the business? And ultimately my responsibilities lie in ensuring that the change investments that we make across the business are replicated and delivered as best as we can.
Cool, sounds good. Interested to hear about your architecture background. Wasn't aware of that. So in terms of, you must have had a busy year then, or 18 months at Vida Belmont Green, because Vida's made quite a splash recently, re-entering the market, including the launch of the Milo chatbot that we developed together, your recent announcement of a new core platform that's been developed with Zoot. Would you be able to share some of the insights that are driving this investment in technology at Vida?
Yeah, sure. So I think certainly that was one of the things that attracted me to take up a permanent role at the company, was really the opportunity to, I guess, and we've talked about this a lot before, but mortgage is absolutely ripe for disruption. I think we've seen a lot of change within broader retail banking. And I think now is really the time within mortgages that we're seeing, particularly, I guess, the trust and the maturity of the different technologies that support that sort of end-to-end onboarding process, and really incorporating that into the end-to-end customer journey, the end-to-end intermediary journey. And I think certainly the uptake that we've seen, it's been kind of a gradual uptake, but certainly, I mean, COVID has kind of reinforced the speed of transition, I think, some of the technologies. So yeah, I guess about a kind of year or so ago, we did quite a lot of work just to understand the opportunities within the industry, and in particular, we kind of recognise that there are quite a few challenges, particularly on the intermediary and the customer onboarding, but also that kind of end-to-end, I guess, home buying and home living or kind of letting journey really. And so I think for us, ultimately it's kind of using that technology, using the data, understanding kind of like, where can you sort of optimize things across the end-to-end, but also I think, and again, this kind of came through in some of the work that I was doing whilst at Accenture, but it's really challenging the status quo as to, obviously the mortgage industry is a very kind of old, traditional, in some senses, industry. And I think more traditionally, kind of people have looked at effectively digitalizing the existing processes, i.e., we have processes A, B, C, and D, and therefore we need to put A, B, C, and D into the computer. But for us, it's very much kind of challenging some of that as well. So obviously we need to make sure that from kind of regulatory perspective, from a risk perspective, we're absolutely comfortable with that. But it's kind of like also, what do the customers want? What do the intermediaries want? How can we help make their lives as easy as possible, and really use technology and data? And we've got the concept of sort of augmented reality, I guess, which augments that technology and data, but alongside the human support, which absolutely is required for, I guess, a kind of mortgage product, just because of the complexities that it is. That's
really interesting. So I guess, so you're right. So in terms of the mortgage sector, I think it'd be fair to say, compared to others within financial services, probably maybe a couple of years behind in terms of, some of the basics, just passing data electronically between different parties, for example, things like that. And there has been a growing momentum in recent years, lots of talk around, leveraging AI, open banking, digital ID, chatbots, APIs, etc., to really try and deliver a more frictionless process for customers and for intermediaries as well. Can you paint a bit of a picture for us on your vision for what that future journey could look like, and how you're going to make that a reality?
Yeah, I guess, so this is probably not necessarily Vida initially, but I think for me, and again, it kind of leans off the work that I did a few years back ago sort of Accenture and with UK Finance, was really, I think that the whole sort of ecosystem, I guess, that surrounds that sort of mortgage environment, and mortgage being like more of the kind of lender part of that, but the kind of home buying and home owning and home letting ecosystem is quite fragmented. So I think for me, actually, the key to unlocking it all isn't necessarily the kind of individual companies themselves, but is almost the kind of overarching kind of collaboration engagement between the different parties that sit within that ecosystem. So right through from the estate agents to the intermediaries to the lenders to the valuers and surveyors to the conveyancers, all the way through to HM Land Registry, who ultimately kind of write your title deed. In my head, actually kind of creating an end-to-end kind of API language that almost goes and flows between those, for me, is ultimately where I think the industry should get to. Now, clearly, like us as a lender within that, we are kind of a part of that broader ecosystem. So I guess from our perspective, it's trying to absolutely at that kind of upfront stage of the initial interaction with the intermediaries, making that as kind of seamless as possible. So we are seeing lenders, I guess, in the industry now look to incorporate those APIs both into the sourcing systems, but also into the broker CRM. And then working very closely with those intermediaries to go through that origination and onboarding process for the customers. Supporting them with whatever, I guess, data can be obtained in a digital format, and kind of where we trust that data and we have the confidence in that data, effectively reducing the volume of kind of paperwork and requests that would go out both to the intermediary and the customer throughout their journey, and streamlining that as much as possible, really. And then I guess, again, kind of utilising those new technologies, so AVMs, desktops, to not necessarily replace physical valuations. I think absolutely physical valuations still have their place, but for certain types of properties, certain types of purchase, people definitely purchases. But for those kind of simpler remortgages, for example, I think we ultimately will see kind of an increase in that, and I think that's certainly been prevalent in terms of the COVID things that we've seen within the industry as well. Yeah.
That's certainly something we saw, wasn't it? Through necessity to keep some business ticking through, I guess. We saw a lot more adoption of AVMs, and some people removing the the requirement for wet signatures, etc. So I guess it'd be interesting to see how long lasting that kind of mindset shift is, I guess, because now that touch wood, hopefully it won't be another lockdown, and that's not strictly necessary, but now that people can see the advantages of digital and the real business need for this. I mean, certainly at .9, the conversations I'm having, I have noticed quite a big mindset shift, actually, and a bit of acceleration in terms of previous conversations from years ago now reigniting around, okay, now we're ready actually to move ahead with more sort of meaningful digital transformation. So do you think that'll be a kind of a transitory, temporary phenomenon, or people sort of revert back to old ways of thinking, or do you think that was such a shock that it'd be more of a permanent kind of mindset shift?
I think personally, I hope it is a mindset shift. I think part of it is almost the trust that you have in in the technology, and B, in the data that kind of you're utilizing for those things. And I think almost the more people that use those those new technologies, the more that gets improved, the more data that then goes into the system, the more refined it can be. Then with AVMs, the increase in the amount of confidence in a particular AVM type. And it's kind of like a compound effect that it improves and enhances that maturity, but most importantly, the trust. And I think that's trust, obviously, from a kind of lender perspective, in terms of we're comfortable with our risk and kind of what we're lending on, but also from a regulatory perspective, that the kind of trust that we have in that data absolutely serves what we need to from a regulatory perspective.
There's some innovative products. I can't remember the name of the company, but during lockdown they launched a product that was an AVM solution that was also backed up by insurance. So ultimately, if it turned out to be incorrect for some reason, the valuation, that it had it had another level of security and trust for those utilising it. So I think that's probably something that's going to continue to move forward. Interesting. Touching on, you talked a lot about utilising data and automation, etc., which all makes complete sense. But I guess Vida, being a specialist lender, naturally the type of cases that are coming to you, I'd imagine there'd always be an element of human underwriting for a lot of cases. Is the approach more around kind of sort of augmenting, that human effort and really focusing that human effort on tasks that really need it versus, some of the tasks that really don't need human effort, reading of data, etc.? Is that kind of the approach that you're sort of taking?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sort of across the industry, certainly within that sort of some of that decisioning elements, where you can have rule-based decisions, absolutely. And if they're kind of like black and white and they're very easy and you kind of to evidence and kind of make a decision on, then you should be doing that. And equally, going out and getting data where you can get that data and you don't have to kind of over orchestrate the information you're requesting, but you still make sure you get what you can. Yeah. So basically, I suppose our kind of view is that where it is simple or where that's rule based, or where that data is available digitally now in kind of trusted sources, absolutely try and automate as much of that as you can, because what that then does is that allows our operations teams and our underwriters to be able to spend the time really on kind of that human interaction, that human element of really assessing that case, getting into the thick of that case, but almost like the groundwork, I guess, as to how they're going to assess it would have been done kind of quite a lot through the system, and actually intuitively kind of, I know you used the word, but we definitely have something internally where we talk about augmented underwriting all the time. Okay. It's using that technology and using that data as much as we can, but sitting alongside it, absolutely, we still see a place absolutely for underwriters, because that's mortgage is a complex thing. Yeah. In my mind, you're definitely always going to need an element of that, for sure.
I think certainly in terms of the complexity of the labour market, post-COVID, we're moving, income's gone more complex anyway in terms of the gig economy and more, self-employed people, etc. Definitely, there'll always be sort of a need for that at the specialist end. So I guess,
I think, sorry, I was going to say, and I think it's also just supporting our colleagues to be able to understand where you kind of source all of that information, where is it that they then need to focus their time. So there might be that some parts of the kind of underwriting, be that the customer's personal situation or personal information, their personal finances or the property, it might be that like some elements of that are kind of fine. It might be that some elements of that we need to do more work to look into. So it's also supporting our underwriters to be able to focus their efforts on where that insight's required, I guess.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. I guess kind of a related kind of question would be the future role of the broker in this world of increasing automation, etc. What's kind of Vida's vision for the future, or how you think that the role of the broker will change?
Yeah, I think for us, absolutely, brokers are very much at the heart of everything that we do. We recently launched a kind of innovation hub we call the V Lab, and we're getting brokers to provide us with constant feedback across our end-to-end, from our product and our proposition through to our kind of journey and our process, how we interact with customers, etc. They're very much intrinsic to what we do, and I very much see that, and kind of you can just look at the stats. 77% of the market is introduced through brokers, and that's only going up. So I definitely think that the brokers will continue to be a significant core of the market. And I think almost particularly in the situations that we are now finding ourselves in, where even pre-COVID, where you have more kind of gig economy and it's just a more complex world in which we live in, does actually require perhaps that sort of additional support and advice anyway, to be able to make sure that customers know kind of which lenders will be able to support them depending on their circumstances, but also just to support them through that end to end if they do have particularly kind of complex circumstances that they operate within.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think I was going to say, like, I think the one thing for me possibly is maybe seeing an increase in more of a kind of aggregator kind of part of the market. So perhaps, and again, some of those more modern brokers might do it themselves too, but it's almost kind of things like remortgages where a customer's been through it a few times before. It's quite a simple shift. Actually, I think that quite a few customers might actually want to kind of be more self-service in that respect, but still absolutely kind of probably go through those comparison sites and effect all those sourcing systems, I guess, in a way, to go directly through. But I do think that I almost see kind of aggregators and brokers kind of coming together in a way as well. Yes,
I think that's a trend. I think on the head we've seen in terms of the rise of product transfer becoming a bigger portion of the market, and really. And we've done a lot of user testing at .9 over the last couple of years, and you'll cast your mind back. There was lots of speculation in the mortgage press a few years ago about the rise of the robo mortgage advisor, and sort of people predicting that you wouldn't have mortgage advisors, they'd all be AI driven, etc. Some kind of the kind of more bold predictions, I guess. But actually, when we got to the lab and tested some of these propositions with users. So yes, when they're buying their insurance online, or kind of, or even a question like, your pension, your appetite for risk of your pension, that's fundamentally 5 or 6 questions around your risk appetite.
Yeah.
However, a mortgage is a lot more of a sort of emotive topic, and it's such a big purchase or a bigger financial commitment that actually what we found is yes, people want some demographics and some people want to be able to self-service, do some of that initial sourcing, get a rough idea themselves, and perhaps use digital ID, plug into open banking. There's definitely an openness to that. But ultimately, even if it is just that hour or two call at the key part of the process from a qualified mortgage advisor, we found that throughout all the demographics, that is something that comes through really strongly. But that's, you're right. But when it comes to remortgaging and kind of product transfer, there's a bit less of a reason, I guess, there.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess, if we think about the whole process of, buying a house, getting a mortgage, etc. As you alluded to earlier, as one lender, you can do a lot of great stuff to optimize the DIP and application process. You can make that super slick, etc. But the whole life cycle of that journey, often a lot of the pain and slowdown is at the conveyancing stage. And I think everyone's kind of probably been through, that's bought a house, has kind of been through that process, and it can be a little bit frustrating and quite archaic in many ways, and probably an area that's really ripe for change. We've seen HM Land Registry doing some really interesting stuff in recent years with their digital street and also digital mortgage deeds. How do you see that conveyancing process changing in the coming years?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it certainly is an area of the industry that, again, we keep using the phrase, but it's kind of ripe for disruption. And I think just from my personal experience, just recently kind of going through a new purchase, and I got sent a paper copy from the solicitor or the conveyancer of a form that I had to fill in and send back to them. So I did that within 2 days and back again. Yep. And a day after that, I then got a link through to an online form, which was basically exactly the same thing, but with like 5 less questions in it. And obviously that was a lot easier because it then didn't mean I had to find an envelope that I don't have, order that off Amazon, and then put it in the post box. So I think that there's, we're kind of proactively looking at how we can help that, because I think it's also just from a customer perspective as well, and also clearly from a broker perspective of understanding where things are up to. But from a customer perspective, I think when you're sort of engaging through a lender, and particularly if you've appointed a conveyancer through that lender, or you have been appointed through that lender, again, this is my personal experience, but I kind of then associate that conveyancer with my experience of being with that lender, and I know a few of the conveyancers as well sort of white label themselves and do also have the lender view. So to your point, if you've got a very slick upfront process, and by the time you get conveyancing, it kind of goes out to someone who, as a customer, even same brand, but they're asking me for the same information again, like my ID or information about me or information about my family, that to me is like, it's quite broken. So I think definitely use of APIs, but also just kind of intuitive dashboards really that inform everybody where everything's up to at any moment in time. Because I do appreciate that from a conveyancing perspective, those guys have to do the checks that they need to do as well. Again, I think like it comes back to my point around the sort of end-to-end ecosystem and kind of link that together. And I just wonder whether actually there's so many digital courses and digital places you can go and get that information or share that information. Actually, if from a regulated perspective, if they put in a time rating that certain source providers could give, then actually could you just share that information amongst the industry they would have met that standard, and therefore everybody involved in the ecosystem can trust that,
Yeah.
rather than having to ask the customer 5 different times throughout the journey to give their ID.
Yes, I think the ID is a really interesting point. So we've been talking to digital ID providers a couple of years, and it's the obvious solution here is if you give your digital ID to one party, if it's trusted along with the rest of the parties, that they could tokenize that, share that along, not have to ask for that later down the journey. But it's just not possible at the moment because there's no kind of regulatory, it's early doors, isn't it, in that as a technology. There's no kind of regulatory kind of framework that would enable them to do that because they have their own responsibility to do their due diligence, etc. And there was an interesting government paper released where they're trying to kind of coalesce around or trying to get industry to drive some standardization. So interesting to see what effect that has. Often government's not super successful at pushing these things forward, but I think the commerciality, the necessity of this will kind of start to drive more adoption next year. Although I was on a panel, I think it was last year, with the lady from the Conveyancing Association who pointed out, I think, I'm going to say a number, I can't remember exactly right, but it was, many thousands of separate conveyances that are members, and, trying to kind of get some agreement and standardization between them. It's quite a challenge from them as well. So I wonder if perhaps speed and technology would perhaps commercially become a bit of a differentiator. And I guess if companies like Vida looking for conveyancing, partners, that probably would become, that would be really a key reason why you choose them, right? If it's a part of that journey. So be interesting to see how that develops.
Definitely.
So I guess Vida are, you've been in the market for a good couple of years now, but you're, going through a process, I guess, of reinvention and kicking on to go to the next stage. So I guess we probably would class you as an incumbent to a certain degree. Have you got any advice for kind of other people within incumbent lenders and other organizations that are kind of perhaps not, early on in thinking about, look, we need to do something, but we're not quite sure where to start, how they should approach that in terms of process and approach?
So I think there's probably a couple of ways of doing it. And again, this is me more in my previous consulting land than necessarily at Vida, I guess. But I think the first is just ongoing operational improvement and incremental benefit and all that kind of good stuff. I think that one thing that I did take when I was in Accenture Strategy in the last couple of years that I was there was a huge push on zero-based everything. I know that the notion of kind of zero-based budgeting has been around for quite a long time, but we kind of expanded that proposition, I guess, to kind of encompass everything. So zero-based operation, zero-based design, like the whole kind of thing. And I think, again, this is speaking kind of from my previous background, this is not really what Vida's up to, but it's just kind of really challenging at kind of regular points. So that could be once every 6 months, once every 12 months, but just kind of trying to remove yourself from day to day really, and just say, okay, if we were almost going to start again, because that's what startups have, right? They have a blank sheet of paper. If we're going to start again, what would we do? And clearly we then, that's kind of ultimate kind of dream vision of where you might need to get to, and then gradually kind of work that back into, okay, well, these are the constraints that we currently have. These are the things that we kind of see as ripe for disruption within the industry, or know that startups have already seen them starting to kind of get involved in particular areas. And then almost kind of use that to then prioritize the types of activities that you maybe go after. And then I think that there is then, again, that kind of more broad, I suppose, reflection, which is, okay, well, can I make those amendments and be that flexible to try and get me to that end point, given the constraints that I have? Or actually, do I kind of need to say, you know what, I need to kind of start fresh? And certainly in a number of the conversations I had with the lenders when I was working at Accenture, like that was pretty much in every conversation we had. And it's how to do that kind of smoothly and obviously kind of the transition. And I think that's where the kind of more modern tools of minimum viable products and kind of launching new things into the world, kind of get feedback on the beta testing, that sort of stuff is super important, so that actually you can kind of gradually scale up your pipeline on your and ramp up on your new system. Yes,
that makes sense. And I guess there are tools, as you sort of alluded to now, and processes that enable you to kind of move beyond, often companies understand there might be some challenges around servicing or, the experience of brokers, but actually there are tools that enable you to kind of move beyond a hunch or different people's opinions to actually validate and test, as you alluded to earlier, around lab testing and others. I guess a super powerful thing is, if you have an idea for a blank piece of paper, reimagining of a business. So we did some work last year with a big health insurance company on this proposition, thinking, okay, if you started from a blank piece of paper and had no challenges of internal legacy systems or whatnot, what would be the optimum mobile first future health insurance digital journey? So that was a really fun, exciting project that we worked on a couple of weeks. And effectively, you could prototype and bring these ideas to life, some of them quite radically different from how it works at the moment, and then test these ideas with users. So you get that feedback early on, like, is this a good idea or a bad idea? Do users want or not want this? And ultimately, that enables you to kind of sense check that before you've invested too much money. I think that's a really powerful thing that startups can sort of teach incumbents, from my view, is around that process of kind of assuming nothing, build small, test, validate, etc. Which is what we did with you guys, obviously, for the chatbot and some other recent works. I think that kind of process is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And I think also just within kind of my role within change, we've tried to move a lot more towards a design thinking mentality. So really kind of, it's slightly difficult in a remote environment, but using tools like Mural and that sort of thing, to actually kind of whiteboard out that stuff. Obviously, that you mentioned, doing the kind of lo-fi, hi-fi prototyping. Even in the remote sessions, there's still so many tools out there that you can use to, to do that test, do that upfront testing as early as possible. And for us, it's as important to do that, obviously, with our intermediaries and our customers, as it is actually with our colleagues, and even to some extent, we are starting to do that with our partners in the market as well.
Yes, that's interesting. Is often internal users sometimes kind of overlooked in this testing, but so you're testing these internal platforms, obviously with the underwriters and similar.
Yeah, because we kind of see that, like, ultimately, if an intermediary calls into our business, it's as important for our colleagues to be able to understand and kind of empathize with those intermediaries and understand exactly where they're up to, and why they're asking the particular questions they're asking, as it is for the intermediaries in a way, because that's who they're serving at the end of the day.
Yes. And obviously you're getting strong direction. For this to work, leadership have to be completely bought into this, and that's a key component as well, I guess. Cool. It sounds like really exciting times ahead. Lots of stuff in the works. I know that you're sort of busy building at the moment, and I guess next year perhaps we can start to see the kind of fruits of some of that out in the market. Some really useful insights that you shared there, Vicky. Is there anything you want to sort of end on as a last piece of advice for those in the market?
I think it's just, sounds cheesy, but it's just there to dream. It's there to challenge the status quo. And I get quite often told off from my husband for possibly being a bit too passionate about my work. Mortgages were so fun, right?
Yeah.
But I think you can make it fun. And I think the environment that you work in, the huge opportunities that there are in this industry, and more excitingly, I guess, just personally for us, is like at Vida, again, kind of one of the reasons why I took the job is actually being able to then kind of put that into practice and hopefully, be able to make a difference as we kind of go forwards in mortgage land, I guess.
Good stuff. I love that. Love that positive end. Good. Well, thanks a lot for joining today, Vicky, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.